The sun was merciless that first morning, beating down on the dusty streets of Ouagadougou as the city slowly awakened. Market vendors arranged their colorful fabrics. Children chased chickens through narrow alleys, and the usual symphony of motorbikes and honking cars began to fill the air. But something was different at the presidential palace gates. She stood there like a statue carved from determination itself, a woman with skin the color of warm coffee beans, her dreadlocks wrapped in a vibrant green scarf that caught the morning light. The guards had noticed her before dawn, when the city was still wrapped in darkness, and the only sounds were the distant calls of roosters and the whispered prayers from nearby mosques. "Amara," she had told the first guard who approached her, her voice carrying the melodic accent of Jamaica mixed with something deeper, more urgent. "My name is Amara, and I've come for love." The guard, a young man named Ousmane who had been on duty for less than a year, didn't know what to make of her. Foreign visitors weren't uncommon. Diplomats, journalists, aid workers passed through these gates regularly. But this woman was different. She carried no briefcase, no official documents, no entourage, just a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder and a hand-painted sign that read in French, "Je suis venu pour l'amour, pas pour la guerre." I came for love, not war. "Madame," Ousmane had said, adjusting his rifle uncomfortably, "you cannot stand here. This is a restricted area." Amara had smiled then, a smile that seemed to hold both sadness and unwavering resolve. "I understand, mon frère, but I have traveled across oceans and through deserts for one reason only. I must be here. President Ibrahim Traoré needs protection, and I have come to offer my life for his safety." Ousmane had looked around helplessly. In his training, they had covered many scenarios: armed attacks, protest crowds, diplomatic incidents. But no one had prepared him for a Jamaican woman claiming to offer her life out of love for the president. By midday, word had spread among the guards. The woman wasn't causing trouble, wasn't shouting slogans or demanding entry. She simply stood there, holding her sign, occasionally sipping water from a plastic bottle, her eyes fixed on the palace gates with an intensity that made even the most seasoned guards uncomfortable. Captain Yusuf Cabaret, the head of palace security, arrived in the afternoon. A man in his 50s with graying temples and scars on, his hands from the civil unrest years ago, he had seen every kind of person try to get close to the president. But this woman puzzled him. "What do you want?" he asked in French, studying her face for any sign of deception. "To stand here," Amara replied simply. "To be close enough to shield him if danger comes." Shield him from what? From those who would see Africa remain on its knees. Caboret raised an eyebrow. This woman spoke like someone who understood politics, not like a simple admirer or mentally unstable fan. "You know nothing about our president's security. Why do you think you can help?" Amara's eyes never left his face, "Because I feel his pain. I see what he carries. The weight of a continent's hopes, the target on his back for daring to say no to those who have stolen from us for centuries. I don't need to carry a gun, Captain. Sometimes the most powerful protection is simply having someone willing to die for you." That night, Caboret filed his report. Foreign national, female, approximately 30-35 years, claims romantic motivation, no apparent threat, recommend continued observation. By the third day, Amara had become part of the landscape. Street vendors began greeting her in the morning. Children ran past her on their way to school, and even some of the guards found themselves nodding in acknowledgement when they passed. She had established a routine. Prayer at dawn, facing the palace gates. Quiet sitting throughout the morning, brief walks around the permitted perimeter during lunch, more sitting in the afternoon, and sleeping on a thin mat she had purchased from a nearby market, using her canvas bag as a pillow. The local media picked up the story on day 5. Fatima Ouedraogo, a reporter for Radio Omega, approached her with a microphone and cautious curiosity. "Madame Amara," Fatima began in French, "people are talking about you. Can you tell us why you're here?" Amara looked up from her seated position, her eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and unwavering purpose. "I am here because President Traoré represents something that Africa has been waiting for, a leader who refuses to bow to foreign masters. In Jamaica, we sing about Babylon's system, about breaking mental slavery. This man is doing it for real. But why come here personally? Why not just support him from Jamaica?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers unconsciously touching a small wooden charm that hung around her neck, a piece carved in the shape of an Adinkra symbol representing strength and humility. "Have you ever felt called to something bigger than yourself?" she finally asked. "Not just belief, but a calling that pulls at your soul?" "I dreamed about this place, about him for months. I saw danger surrounding him, and I knew I had to be here." The interview aired that evening and was picked up by other stations across West Africa. Social media began buzzing with Amara Vigil and the Love Not War hashtags. Some praised her dedication, others questioned her sanity, but the story was spreading. On day 7, the first sign of international attention arrived. A crew from France 24 appeared at the gates, their satellite truck and professional equipment drawing curious crowds. The reporter, Marie-Claire Dubois, was polished and skeptical as she addressed her camera. "We're here in Ouagadougou, where a mysterious woman from Jamaica has been maintaining a week-long vigil outside the presidential palace, claiming she's here to protect President Traoré out of love." It's a story that has captured social media attention across French-speaking Africa, but raises questions about security and the psychological state of foreign nationals in the region. Dubois approached Amara with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting answers. "Mademoiselle, your story has gone viral. Don't you think this is all rather extreme?" Amara stood slowly, her movements deliberate and graceful despite the obvious fatigue. "Extreme? What's extreme is watching your people suffer while foreign powers extract billions in resources. What's extreme is seeing a leader who dares to change the system and knowing he faces death threats every day. Sitting here, hoping my presence provides even a small deterrent to his enemies? That's not extreme. That's love." The France 24 piece aired with a tone of amused condescension, but it had an unintended effect. Across the diaspora, in London, Paris, New York, Toronto, African communities began sharing the story with pride and support. Amara Vigil became a symbol of something larger than one woman's apparent infatuation. By day 10, everything changed. Amara had been standing in the morning sun, swaying slightly on her feet, when she suddenly collapsed. The thud of her body, hitting the dusty ground, sent several guards rushing forward, and within minutes, a crowd had gathered. Dr. Aminata Sawadogo, a nurse who worked at the nearby Yalgado University Hospital, was walking to work when she saw the commotion. She pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Amara's unconscious form, checking her pulse and breathing. "She's dehydrated and malnourished," Dr. Sawadogo announced to the guards. "When did she last eat?" The guards looked at each other uncomfortably. They had been watching her, yes, but not caring for her. That had never been their job. But seeing her collapsed like that, vulnerable and alone, something shifted in the collective consciousness of those who had been observing her daily ritual. When Amara regained consciousness 20 minutes later, she found herself surrounded by concerned faces. Someone had brought a chair from a nearby shop, another person held a bottle of water to her lips, and Dr. Sawadogo was gently checking her feet, which were cracked and bleeding from days of standing on rough pavement. "Sister," Dr. Sawadogo said in French, her voice gentle but firm, "you cannot continue like this. Your body is breaking down." Amara tried to stand, but the doctor held her down. "I have to be here," Amara whispered. "He needs protection." And how will you protect anyone if you're dead from malnutrition? Dr. Sawadago began cleaning Amara's wounds with antiseptic from her medical bag. Look around you. Do you see? People care about what you're doing, but caring means keeping you alive to continue it. That afternoon, a transformation began. Mama Khadija, who sold fruit near the palace gates, brought Amara mangoes and bananas. Ibrahim, a young student from the University of Ouagadougou, arrived with a foam mattress and a small tent. By evening, a support network had spontaneously formed around the woman who had become a symbol of unwavering dedication. The guards found themselves in an awkward position. Their job was to maintain security and prevent unauthorized gatherings. But the small group of people caring for Amara weren't protesting or causing trouble. They were simply ensuring that someone's act of devotion didn't become a death sentence. Captain Traore made another report. Situation developing. Local support for foreign national growing. No security threats identified, but crowd management may become necessary if attention continues to increase. Inside the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat in his office reviewing security briefings and economic reports. At 35, he was young for a head of state, but his face carried the weight of someone who had seen too much too quickly. The coup that had brought him to power was still fresh in many people's minds, and the pressures from both internal and external forces were relentless. His aide, Lieutenant Colonel Burema Tapsoba, knocked and entered with the daily media summary. "Mr. President," Tapsoba began, "the situation with the Jamaican woman is gaining international attention. The story has been picked up by BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera. Social media engagement is significant, particularly among African diaspora communities." Traoré looked up from his papers, his expression neutral but attentive. "What's the security assessment?" Captain Traoré believes she poses no direct threat, but her presence is attracting crowds and media attention. There's also been some chatter on social platforms that could be concerning, people calling her a guardian angel or suggesting that her presence is somehow mystically protecting you. Traoré was quiet for a moment, then walked to the window that overlooked the palace grounds. From his vantage point, he couldn't see the main gates, but he could see the increased activity in the courtyard as guards dealt with the unusual situation. "Show me the footage," he said finally. Tapsoba activated a tablet and pulled up several video clips. Amara's original interview with Radio Omega, the France 24 piece, and various social media videos taken by passers-by. Traoré watched intently, his face betraying no emotion. What struck him most wasn't her words, but her stillness. In a world of performative politics and manufactured outrage, there was something genuinely quiet about her presence. She wasn't shouting, wasn't demanding attention, wasn't trying to leverage her situation for personal gain. She was simply there, with an intensity that seemed to burn from within. "What do we know about her background?" Traoré asked. Tapsoba consulted his notes. "Born in Kingston, Jamaica, 32 years old, real name Amara Sinclair. University education, degree in international relations from the University of the West Indies. No criminal record. She worked for various NGOs focusing on African development issues. Left Jamaica 6 months ago, traveled through Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Mali before arriving here. Family. Parents deceased, no siblings, no husband or children. She appears to be genuinely alone in the world." Traoré absorbed this information silently. An educated woman with no apparent ulterior motives, no family pressures, no obvious handlers. Either she was exactly what she appeared to be, a passionate supporter driven by genuine belief, or she was a very sophisticated operative. Increase surveillance but maintain distance, he decided. "I want to know everyone who approaches her, everyone who brings her supplies, everyone who shows interest, and I want to know more about her time in Ivory Coast." That evening, as the sun set over Ouagadougou, Traore found himself returning to the window, wondering about the woman who had crossed an ocean to sit outside his gates. In his experience, such devotion usually masked either mental illness or hidden agendas. But something about Amara Sinclair intrigued him, and in his position, intrigue was both a luxury and a potential danger. 3 weeks into Amara's vigil, the first real test came. A group of opposition protesters, emboldened by the international attention focused on the palace gates, decided to stage their own demonstration nearby. They weren't many, perhaps 30 people carrying signs criticizing government economic policies, but their presence created a tense situation. The protesters positioned themselves about 100 meters from where Amara maintained her vigil, close enough to be associated with her in media coverage, but far enough to avoid direct confrontation. Their leader, a university lecturer named Dr. Musa Tinto, had been careful to frame their demonstration as separate from, but sympathetic to the love vigil. "We support Sister Amara's dedication to our president," Dr. Tinto told journalists. "But love must include holding leaders accountable for their promises to the people." The situation put palace security in a difficult position. The protesters were peaceful and within their rights, but their proximity to Amara created the possibility of incidents or confusion about her actual message and loyalties. Captain Kabore approached Amara that afternoon, his demeanor more serious than usual. "Madame," he said, "there may be trouble. These protesters. Some people think you're with them. Others think they're using your vigil for political purposes. It could become dangerous." Amara looked toward the protesters, then back at the captain. "What would President Traoré want me to do?" The question surprised Kabore. Most people in such situations asked what they should do for themselves, not what would serve someone else's interests. "He would want you to be safe," Kabore replied. "Carefully." "Then I'll stay here," Amara said simply. "Moving away would suggest I'm afraid of association with people exercising their democratic rights. That would dishonor both the president and the protesters." Her response impressed Kabore, but it also made him more suspicious. Either she was remarkably politically astute for someone claiming to be motivated purely by love, or she was very well-trained in managing complex situations. The protest lasted 3 days. During that time, Amara maintained her position and routine, but she made several subtle gestures that demonstrated her political sophistication. When journalists tried to get her to comment on the protesters' criticisms, she politely declined but expressed support for democratic dialogue. When some of the protesters approached her with food and water, she accepted graciously but didn't engage in political discussions. Most tellingly, when a few aggressive individuals from both sides, supporters trying to drive away the protesters, and protesters trying to co-opt her vigil, created tension, Amara stood and walked directly to the palace guards. "Messieurs," she said, addressing the senior guard on duty, "perhaps it would help if I spoke to both groups. I don't want my presence to cause problems for anyone." She then did something remarkable. She walked to the middle ground between the two groups and sat down, placing her sign beside her. Without words, her position said clearly, "I am here for love, not political division, but I respect everyone's right to be heard." The gesture diffused the tension. The protesters maintained their demonstration but moved slightly further away. The aggressive supporters dispersed, and Amara returned to her usual position, having demonstrated a level of wisdom and emotional intelligence that impressed even the most skeptical observers. That night, Captain Kabore filed a different kind of report. Subject demonstrates exceptional political awareness and conflict resolution skills, either genuine or extremely well-trained. Recommend deeper background investigation. 200 kilometers. South, in a nondescript office building in Abidjan's Plateau district, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. The office was officially registered to a consulting firm specializing in African development partnerships. But the three men gathered around a conference table represented interests that went far deeper than economic development. Julian Morel was the kind of man who disappeared in crowds. Average height, thinning brown hair, the unremarkable features of a middle manager. But his eyes held the calculated intelligence of someone who had spent 15 years in French intelligence services, and his current role as cultural attaché at the French embassy was a cover for more sensitive operations. Across from him sat a man known only as Ghost, a former captain in the Burkina Faso army who had officially died in a terrorist attack 2 years earlier, but had actually been recruited by French intelligence during a moment of personal and professional crisis. His real name was Abdoulaye Zongo, and he had spent months building a network of African operatives willing to work against their own governments for what they believed was the greater good of continental stability. The third man, Jean-Baptiste Kone, was Ivorian intelligence, representing the complex relationship between Abidjan and its northern neighbor. Ivory Coast had its own reasons for wanting Burkina Faso's current government to fail, primarily related to regional influence and economic competition. "The woman has been there for 3 weeks now," Morel said, reviewing photos and video footage spread across the table. "The attention is growing and it's becoming a liability." Ghost leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "She's doing exactly what we planned, creating a sympathetic story that humanizes Traore while positioning herself for access. The question is whether she can maintain the performance long enough to get inside." "Performance?" Kone raised an eyebrow. "I've watched the footage. If that's acting, she's better than any operative I've ever seen. That's what makes her perfect for this mission," Ghost replied. "Amara doesn't just believe in the role, she becomes it. It's what made her invaluable in Lagos, in Dakar, in Accra. She develops genuine feelings for her targets, which makes her completely convincing." Morel spread out a series of dossiers. "The problem is that genuine feelings can become genuine loyalties. Are we certain she hasn't crossed that line?" "She sends reports," Ghost said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Coded messages through the support network that's formed around her. Basic intelligence, guard rotations, palace routines, media management strategies. Nothing sensitive yet, but consistent contact." "Yet?" Kone pressed. "How long are we prepared to wait, and what if she's compromised?" Ghost was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to the window overlooking Abidjan's bustling financial district. "Amara is the most naturally gifted operative I've ever recruited. She has a gift for making targets trust her, for finding emotional vulnerabilities, for making people believe she genuinely cares about them. But that gift comes with risks." He turned back to the others. "If she's been compromised, we'll know soon enough. Traore isn't naive. If he suspects her, he'll either eliminate her or try to turn her. Either way, we'll adapt." "And if she's turned?" Morel asked. "Then we activate contingency protocols," Ghost replied coldly. "She knows too much to be allowed to work against us." The meeting ended with an agreement to maintain current surveillance and wait for Amara to gain access to the palace inner circle. But as the three men left the building, each carried private doubts about whether they still controlled the woman whose devotion was becoming the talk of West Africa. On day 43 of her vigil, everything changed. Amara was sitting in her usual spot, reading a book in the late afternoon sunshine, when Captain Traore approached with 2 other guards she didn't recognize. "Madame Amara," Traore said formally, "the President of the Republic requests your presence." For a moment, Amara's carefully maintained composure cracked. She had dreamed of this moment, planned for it, but now that it was happening, she felt genuinely overwhelmed. Her hands trembled as she closed the book and stood. "Now?" she asked. "Now," Traore confirmed. The walk from the gates to the palace entrance felt both endless and instantaneous. Amara had studied the palace layout from satellite photos and architectural plans, but seeing it up close was different. The building was elegant but not ostentatious, a blend of West African and colonial French architecture that reflected the complex history of the region. Inside, she was struck by the simplicity. Unlike the palaces of other African leaders she had researched, there was no obvious display of wealth or power. The floors were clean but not marble, the furniture functional but not lavish. This was the office of a man who understood that opulence was a political liability in a country where many people struggled to survive. She was led to a waiting room and told to sit. 20 minutes passed. Then an aide appeared, Lieutenant Colonel Tapsoba, though she wasn't told his name or rank. "The president will see you now," he said simply. The office was smaller than she had expected, dominated by a simple wooden desk and the yellow, red, and green flag of Burkina Faso. Behind the desk sat Ibrahim Traoré, and Amara felt her breath catch. She had seen photos and video footage, but in person his presence was more intense. He was younger than she had expected, but his eyes held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. "Sit," he said in French, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. His voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Amara obeyed, placing her hands carefully in her lap to stop them from shaking. Traoré studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You've been outside my gates for 43 days. Most people would have given up after one." "I came to wait," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I wasn't sent." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why me? Why Burkina Faso? Why not Ghana or Senegal or any of the other countries you visited on your way here?" Amara had prepared for this question, but sitting across from him, she found herself speaking from a deeper place than her training. Because Ghana and Senegal, for all their progress, still dance to rhythms written in Paris and London. Because you're the first leader I've seen who truly says no to the powers that have kept Africa poor while making others rich. Because when I see you speak, I see the future my ancestors dreamed of but never thought would come. And what do you think you can offer that future? My life, if necessary." Traoré leaned back in his chair. "Life is easy to offer when you don't expect it to be taken. What can you offer while living?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected to be asked about her background, her motivations, her intentions. Instead, he was asking her to justify her existence in practical terms. "I can be witness," she said finally. "I can ensure that whatever happens to you, the world will know the truth. Too many African leaders have been eliminated quietly, their stories told by their enemies. I can be your historian, your guardian, your voice to the world if they silence. Yours." Something flickered in Traoré's eyes. "And if I am simply another politician, another leader who promises change but delivers disappointment, what then?" Amara met his gaze directly. "Then I will witness that truth as well. But I don't believe you are." They spoke for another hour. He asked about her education, her travels, her understanding of African politics and French influence. Her answers revealed a sophisticated grasp of complex issues, but more importantly, they revealed a perspective shaped by genuine passion rather than academic theory. As the sun began to set, Traoré made a decision that would change both their lives. "There is a guest room in the east wing of the palace," he said. "If you are truly here to be witness and guardian, then you should be close enough to fulfill that purpose. But understand this, once you cross that threshold, there is no going. Back to the simple story of a woman in love. Inside these walls, everyone is suspect, everyone is watched, and everyone is vulnerable. Are you prepared for that reality?" Amara felt her heart racing. This was the moment her entire mission had been designed to achieve. But sitting across from Ibrahim Traoré, she realized that success might be more complicated than she had imagined. "I'm prepared," she said. That night, as she lay in a simple but comfortable bed within the presidential palace, Amara stared at the ceiling and wondered which version of herself was real. The spy trained to infiltrate and extract, or the woman who had found something worth believing in. Outside her window, the lights of Ouagadougou twinkled like scattered stars, and for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been peace. The first week inside the palace passed in a careful dance of observation and adaptation. Amara was given considerable freedom to move around the public areas, eat with staff, and even attend some of the cultural events hosted for visiting dignitaries. But she was always aware of being watched, evaluated, and tested. The staff's reactions to her presence varied. Some treated her with curiosity and respect, seeing her as the woman whose dedication had touched hearts across Africa. Others regarded her with suspicion, wondering what a foreign woman really wanted with their president. A few seemed to study her with professional interest, and she realized that palace security was more sophisticated than it appeared on the surface. Her most significant interaction was with Dr. Marie Ouedraogo, the palace physician, and one of the few other women with regular access to the president's inner circle. Dr. Ouedraogo was in her 40s, elegant and intelligent, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most educated person in any room. "So," Dr. Ouedraogo said, one morning as they shared coffee in the staff dining area, "you're the famous Amara, the woman who crossed oceans for love." "I'm just a woman who believes in what President Traoré represents," Amara replied carefully. "And what do you think he represents?" Amara considered the question, aware that her answer would be reported back to others. "Hope. The possibility that Africa can define its own future rather than accepting the roles others have written for us." Dr. Ouedraogo nodded thoughtfully. "It's a beautiful dream, but hope can be a dangerous thing when it encounters political reality. Are you prepared for the possibility that even good men make difficult choices when faced with impossible situations?" The Tiai question seemed loaded with meaning, and Amara sensed that Dr. Ouedraogo was trying to convey something important about the pressures and compromises that came with power. "I think," Amara said slowly, "that supporting someone means standing by them through difficult choices, not abandoning them when the path becomes complicated." That afternoon, she was summoned to Traoré's office for what had become a daily briefing. These sessions weren't formal meetings, but rather conversations where he seemed to be probing her understanding of various issues affecting the country and the region. "Tell me about Jamaica," he said, without preamble as she entered. "What would you like to know? How does a small island nation maintain its identity while being surrounded by more powerful forces?" Amara smiled slightly, very carefully, and with a deep understanding that cultural independence is just as important as political independence. You can't just declare yourself free, you have to think yourself free, dream yourself free, and then live that freedom every day. And the cost of that freedom? Constant vigilance, and accepting that others will always try to undermine what they can't control. Traoré was quiet for a moment, then walked to the window that had become his favorite contemplation spot. "Do you think it's possible for a leader to maintain his principles while making the compromises necessary for survival?" The question felt deeply personal, and Amara sensed that she was being offered a glimpse into his private struggles. "I think," she said carefully, "that the measure of a leader isn't whether he faces impossible choices, but what he's willing to sacrifice when those choices come. Some men sacrifice their people for their principles. Others sacrifice their principles for their people. The rarest ones find ways to honor both." He turned to look at her, and for a moment, the careful distance between them seemed to diminish. "And which kind of leader do you think I am?" "I think you're still deciding." That evening, as Amara prepared for sleep, she reviewed the coded message she would send to Ghost through her network of supporters outside the palace. But as she began to compose the report, she found herself hesitating. The intelligence she had gathered was significant, Details about Traore's daily routines, his closest advisors, his security protocols, and his personal anxieties about leadership. This was exactly the kind of information her handlers wanted. But transmitting it felt like betrayal of something she couldn't quite name. Instead, she wrote a brief message indicating that she was making progress, but needed more time to gain full access. It was technically true, but it was also her first conscious act of misdirection in the operation. As she hid the message in her laundry, to be collected by Malik, the janitor who served as her conduit to the outside, she wondered when her loyalties had become so complicated. 2 weeks into her residency at the palace, Amara accidentally discovered something that would test both her mission parameters and her growing personal attachments. She had been walking through the East Wing garden when she heard voices speaking in what sounded like Russian coming from a partially open window of the president's private study. Her language training included basic Russian, enough to understand that the conversation involved military equipment, training programs, and economic partnerships. She couldn't see the speakers, but she recognized Traore's voice and that of at least 2 other men with distinct Russian accents. The geopolitical implications were enormous. If Burkina Faso was developing closer military ties with Russia, it would represent a significant shift in regional power dynamics and would certainly alarm both French and American intelligence services. This was exactly the kind of information that could justify her entire operation. But as she listened, she also understood the context. The conversation revealed the impossible position Traore faced. Western powers offered economic aid tied to political compliance and continued resource extraction, while Russia offered military support and partnership arrangements that respected sovereignty but came with their own complications. She was so focused on listening that she didn't notice Dr. Ouedraogo approaching until the physician was standing directly behind her. "Interesting garden, isn't it?" Dr. Ouedraogo said quietly. Amara turned, her heart racing. "Yes, very peaceful. And educational, I imagine." Dr. Ouedraogo's tone was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "Would you walk with me?" They strolled deeper into the garden, away from any windows or potential listeners. When they were sufficiently isolated, Dr. Ouedraogo stopped beside a fountain and turned to face Amara directly. "I know what you heard," she said, "and I know what you are." Amara felt ice in her veins. "I don't understand. Please don't insult my intelligence. I've been watching you since you arrived. Your language skills, your political sophistication, your ability to read complex situations. These aren't the attributes of a simple admirer driven by romantic feelings." Amara remained silent, calculating her options. Dr. Ouedraogo continued. "The question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned? And more importantly, what are your real feelings about the man you were sent to betray?" The directness of the question caught Amara off guard. "How do you know that you were sent?" "Because, my dear, I was once where you are now. Different country, different target, different handlers, but the same impossible position of being caught between duty and conscience." This revelation shifted everything Amara thought she understood about her situation. "Who do you work for?" Amara asked. "Now, only for him." Dr. Ouedraogo nodded toward the palace. "But 3 years ago, I was recruited by Chinese intelligence to monitor his health and psychological state. They wanted to know about his medical vulnerabilities, his emotional pressures, his decision-making patterns." "What happened?" "I discovered that some people are worth protecting, even from your own employers. The question is, what have you discovered?" Amara was quiet for a long time, watching the water cascade in the fountain. Finally, she spoke. "I've discovered that betraying him might be more harmful to Africa than anything my handlers fear about his independence." Dr. Ouedraogo smiled sadly. "Then you understand the choice you have to make. But understand also that choosing him means choosing against very powerful people who won't simply let you walk away. That night, Amara's coded message to Ghost contained detailed information about the Russian meeting, but she also included a subtle warning system she had learned during her training, a phrase that indicated she might be under surveillance. It was a delicate balance, maintaining her cover while beginning to protect the man she was supposed to be betraying. She was beginning to realize that the most dangerous part of her mission might not be getting caught by her target, but deciding which side she was really on. The message about the Russian connection triggered immediate action in Abidjan. Within 48 hours, Ghost was on his way to Ouagadougou with new instructions and growing suspicions about his most valuable operative. He arrived in the capital under deep cover, posing as a freelance journalist investigating regional security issues. His press credentials were genuine. One of the advantages of his network was access to legitimate cover identities that could withstand scrutiny. The meeting was arranged through the established protocol. Amara would leave a specific book on a bench in a designated park. Ghost would retrieve it, and the coded markings inside would indicate the time and location for their rendezvous. They met in a small cafe in the Gunghin district, far from the palace and tourist areas. Ghost had chosen the location carefully, crowded, enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for conversation. He arrived first, positioning himself at a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances. Amara entered 20 minutes later, wearing a simple sundress and headscarf that made her blend with the local women. But Ghost's trained eye noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. She moved with less confidence than before. Her eyes scanned the room more carefully, and there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there during their last meeting. In Abidjan. "You look tired," he said in French as she sat down. "It's been an intense few weeks," she replied, ordering tea from the waitress. Ghost studied her face. In the month since her recruitment, Amara had been his most successful operative precisely because of her ability to maintain emotional distance while projecting genuine warmth. But something had changed. The carefully controlled mask had developed. "Cracks. Tell me about the Russian meeting," he said directly. Amara provided a detailed briefing. The participants, the topics discussed, the implications for regional security arrangements. Her information was valuable and professionally presented, but Ghost sensed she was holding something back. "What else?" he pressed. "What do you mean?" "You've been inside for 2 weeks. The Russians are important, but they're not the primary objective. What have you learned about his personal vulnerabilities, his decision-making process, his inner circle?" Amara hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ghost saw confirmation of his growing suspicions. "He's more complex than our initial assessment." "Suggested," she said finally. "His public persona is genuine. He really does believe in African independence and sovereignty. But he's also pragmatic about the costs and challenges. He's not the naive idealist we thought we were dealing with." "That doesn't answer my question." Amara met his eyes directly. "He's lonely. The weight of leadership isolates him from genuine human connection. Everyone who approaches him wants something: political support, economic favors, personal advancement. He's hungry for authentic relationships but afraid to trust anyone completely." Ghost nodded. This was exactly the kind of psychological insight that could be exploited. "And your relationship with him?" "Developing. He sees me as someone without obvious ulterior motives, which makes him more open than he would be otherwise." "Good. It's time to deepen that relationship and move to extraction phase. We need details about his security arrangements, his communication protocols, and his future strategic planning." Amara was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea with unnecessary concentration. "What if the intelligence we extract leads to his assassination?" The question surprised Ghost. In all their previous operations, Amara had never expressed concern about the ultimate fate of her targets. "Our job is intelligence gathering, not policy making," he replied carefully. "What our clients Do with the information is their decision. But we know what they'll do with it. We know that France can't allow him to succeed because it would encourage other leaders to follow his example. We know that if he's eliminated, Burkina Faso will return to being a compliant client state. Ghost leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Are you having second thoughts about the mission? Amara looked up, and for a moment, Ghost saw something he had never seen before in her eyes. Genuine conflict. I'm having thoughts about whether the mission serves Africa's interests or undermines them. This was dangerous territory. Ghost had seen other operatives develop emotional attachments to their targets, but Amara was moving beyond personal feelings into ideological questioning. That made her unpredictable and potentially hostile to the operation. Remember why you accepted this assignment, he said firmly. Remember what you're fighting for. Stability, economic development, continental integration. Traore's approach, however admirable in theory, leads to chaos and conflict. Look at what happened in Libya when Gaddafi challenged Western interests. And look at what Libya became after he was eliminated, Amara replied. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. Ghost realized that he was losing her. The woman, who had been his most reliable asset, was developing her own agenda, and that made her a threat to the entire operation. I think you need a reminder of the stakes involved, he said, pulling out his phone and showing her a series of photos. The images showed the brutal aftermath of terrorist attacks in northern Burkina Faso, destroyed villages, displaced families, children orphaned by violence. The message was clear. Instability had real human costs, and Traore's confrontational approach with Western powers was contributing to regional insecurity. This is what happens when leaders choose ideology over pragmatism, Ghost said. This is what your romantic feelings are protecting. Amara stared at the photos, her face pale. You think eliminating Traore will stop this? I think replacing him with someone more willing to work within established systems will reduce the incentives for destabilization. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Amara spoke. I need more time to get close enough for the intelligence. You want? He's cautious, and his security team is more sophisticated than we initially assessed. Ghost nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. How much time? Another month, maybe 2. You have 3 weeks. After that, we'll have to consider alternative approaches. The threat was implicit but clear. If Amara couldn't complete the mission, they would find other ways to achieve their objectives, and her welfare would not be a consideration. As they parted ways, Ghost watched Amara disappear into the crowded market streets. She was still valuable, but she was also becoming a liability. He would give her the 3 weeks she requested, but he would also begin developing contingency plans. Meanwhile, Amara walked back toward the palace with a growing sense that she was trapped in a web of competing loyalties that offered no clean resolution. The photos Ghost had shown her were real, and the human costs of regional instability were undeniable. But she had also seen the genuine hope that Traore represented for millions of people who had been abandoned by previous leaders. More troubling was her growing awareness that her feelings for Ibrahim Traoré had evolved beyond professional manipulation. She respected his intelligence, admired his courage, and was beginning to care about his welfare in ways that had nothing to do with her mission parameters. As she approached the palace gates, she made a decision that would determine the fate of everyone involved in the operation. She would continue gathering intelligence, but she would also begin looking for ways to protect the man she had been sent to betray. The 3 weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception and emotional complexity. Amara began playing a carefully calibrated double game, providing Ghost with enough genuine intelligence to maintain her credibility while withholding the most sensitive information that could directly endanger Traoré. Her access to the president had deepened significantly. She now joined him for morning walks in the private gardens, attended some policy briefings as an observer, and had even been invited to share dinner with his inner circle on several occasions. To outside observers, it appeared that Ibrahim Traoré was developing genuine feelings for the Jamaican woman who had sacrificed so much to be near him. The reality was more complex. Traoré was indeed drawn to Amara's intelligence and apparent sincerity, but he was also using their relationship to better understand the forces arrayed against him. As a former intelligence officer himself, he recognized the signs of professional training in her questions, observations, and responses. Dr. Ouedraogo had briefed him about her suspicions regarding Amara's true identity, and together they had developed a strategy for managing the situation. Rather than confronting her directly or eliminating her as a threat, they decided to use her presence as a way to feed disinformation to her handlers while gathering intelligence about the networks, targeting his government. The result was a three-dimensional chess game where everyone was simultaneously hunter and prey. Amara's reports to Ghost contained a careful mixture of truth and misdirection. She provided accurate details about palace security routines, but exaggerated the strength of certain defenses while downplaying others. She shared intelligence about Traoré's decision-making process, but painted him as more indecisive and conflicted than he actually was. Most importantly, she failed to mention the growing Russian military cooperation while emphasizing his concerns about regional instability. Meanwhile, Traoré used his conversations with Amara to better understand how foreign intelligence services viewed his government and what kinds of information they were most interested in obtaining. Her questions revealed their priorities, fears, and assumptions about his vulnerabilities. The emotional dimension of their relationship added another layer of complexity. Despite their respective deceptions, both Amara and Traoré found themselves genuinely engaged with each other as individuals rather than just as operative and target. During one of their evening walks, Traoré asked her about her childhood in Jamaica. "It wasn't easy," she said, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "My father died when I was 12, and my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. But she always told me that being poor didn't mean accepting. Poverty is permanent. She said our ancestors survived slavery and colonialism by refusing to let others define what was possible for them. Is that why you became involved in African development work?" Amara nodded. The Caribbean and Africa share a history of exploitation and a struggle for genuine independence. When I see what you're trying to do here, I see the dreams my mother had for all of us who carry African blood. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and Traoré found himself moved despite his knowledge of her likely deception. "And what do you see as possible for Burkina Faso?" he asked. "A country that controls its own resources, educates its own children, and makes decisions based on what's best for its people rather than what's convenient for foreign powers. A place that proves it's possible to be truly independent in the modern world, even if that independence comes with significant costs." Amara stopped walking and turned to face him. Every generation faces the choice between accepting comfortable dependence or fighting for difficult freedom. The costs of independence are visible and immediate. The costs of dependence are often hidden and long-term, but they're usually higher. These conversations deepened their mutual understanding while simultaneously complicating their respective deceptions. Traoré began to see Amara not just as a potential threat, but as someone who might genuinely understand the weight of his responsibilities. Amara began to see him not just as a target, but as a leader facing impossible choices with remarkable grace and intelligence. But their growing connection also made their situation more dangerous. Ghost was becoming increasingly suspicious of Amara's reports and her requests for additional time. His own surveillance network had detected signs that she was being less than completely forthcoming, and pressure from his French handlers was mounting for more actionable intelligence. The crisis came when Ghost received new orders. Amara was to plant surveillance equipment in Traore's private offices during an upcoming state dinner that would provide the necessary distraction. The devices would allow real-time monitoring of his most sensitive conversations and communications. When Ghost passed these instructions to Amara during their next meeting, she realized that she had reached the point where she could no longer maintain her double game. Planting the surveillance equipment would represent a direct betrayal of Traore's trust and would likely lead to intelligence that could be used to engineer his downfall. The security around his private offices is too sophisticated, she lied. I've been looking for opportunities, but there are always guards, and the technical systems are more advanced than we anticipated. Ghost studied her face carefully. Then we need to create an opportunity. I'm arranging for a small incident during the state dinner. Nothing dangerous, just enough confusion to draw security away from sensitive areas temporarily. Amara felt her stomach drop. What kind of incident? A minor kitchen fire, perhaps some food poisoning among the staff, enough to create the kind of crisis that requires immediate attention but doesn't threaten the overall event. The casualness with which he discussed potentially harming innocent palace staff crystallized Amara's evolving feelings about the operation. These were people she had come to know and respect, hard-working individuals who had treated her with kindness and acceptance, despite her foreign status. I'll find another way, she said. No, Ghost replied firmly. The timeline has been accelerated. Our clients are losing patience with gradual approaches. This will happen in 3 days, and you will be ready to take advantage of the situation. That night, Amara lay awake staring at the ceiling of her palace guest room, knowing that she had reached the moment of final choice. In 3 days, she could complete her mission and return to the comfortable moral ambiguity of intelligence work, or she could find a way to protect the man and the dream that had come to mean more to her than her own safety. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. She would warn Traore about the planned operation, accept whatever consequences followed, and hope that her betrayal of her handlers might somehow serve a greater good. But first, she had to figure out how to convince a man who already suspected her true identity, that her change of heart was genuine rather than another layer of deception. The next morning, Amara requested a private meeting with President Traoré, telling his aide that she had important security information to discuss. The request was unusual enough to warrant immediate attention, and within an hour she found herself once again sitting across from him in his private office. But this time, she wasn't alone with him. Dr. Ouedraogo was present, along with Colonel Tapsoba and a man she didn't recognize, older, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority and the scars of someone who had seen combat. "This is General Ousmane Kabore," Traore said, noting her confusion. "My security advisor and the brother of Captain Kabore, whom you know from the palace gates. I asked them to be present because I suspect what you have to tell us concerns all of our safety." Amara felt her heart racing. The presence of senior security personnel suggested that her cover might already be blown, and this meeting might be an interrogation rather than a voluntary confession. "Before you speak," Traore continued, "I want you to understand something. We have known from the beginning that you are not simply a woman driven by romantic feelings to maintain a vigil outside my gates. Your training, your questions, your behavior patterns, they all indicate professional intelligence experience." Dr. Ouedraogo leaned forward. "The question we've been debating is whether you represent an immediate threat that must be eliminated, or a potential asset that might be turned to our advantage." General Kabore spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions for decades. "Your answer to what you're about to tell us will determine which category you fall into." Amara realized that she was at the most crucial moment of her life. Everything she said in the next few minutes would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the future of everyone involved in the complex web of intelligence operations surrounding Traoré's government. She took a deep breath and made her choice. "My real name is Amara Sinclair, and I was recruited by French intelligence 18 months ago during a low point in my personal life. I was trained in Abidjan by a man named Abdoulaye Zongo, who operates under the cover name Ghost, and who was formerly a captain in your army before faking his death and defecting to French intelligence. The room was completely silent. Colonel Tapsoba was taking notes, but his expression revealed nothing. Amara continued. My mission was to gain your trust and extract intelligence about your security arrangements, your strategic planning, and your personal vulnerabilities. The French government believes that your independence policies threaten their economic interests across the region, and they want information that could be used to engineer your removal from power. And have you provided them with such information? General Traore asked. Yes, Amara replied honestly. For the first several weeks, I transmitted regular reports about palace routines, staff personalities, and your general decision-making patterns. But I also began providing them with misleading information about things I thought could be used to harm you directly. Why? Traore asked. Amara met his eyes directly. Because I came to understand that what you represent is more important than what my handlers fear. Because I realized that betraying you would mean betraying the hopes of millions of people who see you as proof that African leaders can choose their people's interests over foreign approval. Dr. Ouedraogo exchanged glances with the others. And what changed your mind definitively? Ghost contacted me 3 days ago with new instructions. There's going to be an incident during the state dinner tomorrow night, likely a kitchen fire or food poisoning among the staff. During the confusion, I'm supposed to plant surveillance equipment in your private offices that would allow real-time monitoring of your most sensitive communications. General Traore leaned back in his chair. Names. I want the names of everyone involved in this operation. For the next hour, Amara provided a detailed briefing on everything she knew about the intelligence network targeting Traore's government, the French handlers, the recruitment methods, the other operatives she suspected were in place, and the broader strategic objectives driving the operation. When she finished, the room was quiet for several minutes. Finally, Traore spoke. You understand that by telling us this, you've signed your own death warrant. Intelligence agencies don't forgive betrayal, and the French have resources that extend far beyond Burkina Faso. I understand. And you understand that we have no way to verify your claims without endangering you further? For all we know, this is another layer of deception designed to make us lower our guard. I understand that too. Then why should we trust you? Amara was quiet for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small recording device. Because I've been recording my meetings with Ghost. I have evidence of the operation, the planned incident, and the broader network. I'm offering to help you destroy the entire intelligence apparatus targeting your government, knowing that doing so will likely cost me my life. She placed the device on Traore's desk. That contains recordings from my last 3 meetings with my handler. You'll be able to verify everything I've told you and identify other threats we haven't discussed. General Traore picked up the device, examined it briefly, then handed it to Colonel Tapsoba. We'll need time to analyze this and plan our response. Traore stood and walked to his window, his back to the room. If your information is accurate, then tomorrow night's state dinner becomes an opportunity to turn the trap back on your former employers. He turned to face Amara. Are you prepared to help us do that? Yes. Even knowing that success will make you a permanent enemy of some very dangerous people? Yes. And what do you want in return? The question surprised Amara. She had expected to be treated as a prisoner or at best a reluctant asset. The idea that she might have negotiating power hadn't occurred to her. I want to help you succeed, she said simply. I want to be part of building the Africa that my mother dreamed of. I don't need safety or comfort or reward. I just want to contribute to something meaningful. Traore studied her face for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Then you'll have that chance. But first, we're going to use tomorrow night to send a message that will be heard in Paris, Abidjan, and every capital where people are plotting against African sovereignty. As the meeting ended and security arrangements began for what would become known as the Night of Broken Chains, Amara realized that she had crossed a point of no return. She was no longer Amara the spy or even Amara the double agent. She had become something else entirely. Amara the revolutionary, willing to risk everything for a dream of African independence that had captured her heart and soul. The state dinner would be more than a diplomatic event. It would be the stage for a confrontation that would determine whether foreign powers could continue manipulating African leaders through espionage and intimidation, or whether a new generation of leaders would find ways to turn the tables on their former masters. 6 months after what the international media called the Ouagadougou incident, Amara sat in a small office overlooking a primary school in the Tanghin Dasuri district of the capital. Her official title was Director of Educational Outreach, but her real role was something more complex and meaningful. The state dinner had gone exactly as planned, but not as Ghost and his handlers had anticipated. Using Amara's intelligence and the evidence from her recordings, Traore's security team had laid an elaborate trap. When the incident occurred and Ghost's operatives moved to plant their surveillance equipment, they walked directly into the arms of Burkina Faso intelligence officers who were waiting for them. The resulting arrests and interrogations had unraveled the entire French intelligence network operating in West Africa. More importantly, the evidence gathered during the operation had been released to international media, exposing decades of covert interference in African politics. Ghost himself had escaped during the confusion, but 3 of his key operatives had been captured, and their testimony had provided a detailed picture of how foreign intelligence services manipulated African governments through bribery, blackmail, and strategic elimination of uncooperative leaders. The revelations had sparked a continental awakening. From Senegal to Kenya, African leaders had begun implementing new security protocols and demanding renegotiation of economic agreements that had been imposed during more vulnerable periods. The Ouagadougou protocols had become a model for other governments seeking to protect themselves from foreign intelligence operations. But the personal cost had been significant. Amara could never return to Jamaica, and she lived under constant security protection due to credible assassination threats from multiple intelligence agencies. Dr. Ouedraogo had been right. Choosing to protect Traore had made her a permanent enemy of very dangerous people. Yet as she watched children in the school courtyard below, children who were learning in their own languages, studying their own history, and growing up with the expectation that Africa could chart its own course, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal safety or comfort. Her relationship with Ibrahim Traoré had evolved into something neither of them had expected. They weren't lovers in any conventional sense, but they shared a bond forged through shared sacrifice and common purpose. He trusted her completely, and she had found in him a leader worthy of the faith she had placed in him. On quiet evenings, they still walked together in the palace gardens, talking about everything from regional politics to childhood memories. The easy intimacy between them was noted by palace staff and visiting dignitaries, but its true nature remained private and undefined. "Do you ever regret it?" he had asked her one evening, referring to her decision to betray her handlers and cast her lot with his government. "Never," she had replied. He had. "But I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had been stronger from the beginning, if I had refused the recruitment instead of waiting until I was in too deep to extract myself cleanly. Then someone else would have been sent," he had said, "and they might not have developed the conscience that saved both of us." As the sun set over Ouagadougou on this particular evening, Amara received a coded message through secure channels. Ghost was still alive and operating, now with even more resources and determination to complete his mission. New operatives were being deployed, and the intelligence war was far from over. But something fundamental had changed. African leaders were no longer isolated targets for foreign manipulation. They had begun sharing intelligence, coordinating security measures, and supporting each other's independence initiatives. The old patterns of divide and conquer were becoming more difficult to maintain. Amara smiled as she deleted the message and prepared to brief Traoré about the new threats they would face together. She had found her calling in the most unlikely place, through the most convoluted path, and despite the constant dangers, she had never been more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. The woman who had once stood outside the palace, gates with a sign declaring she had come for love, had discovered that the deepest love of all was love for a people's right to determine their own destiny. And in that discovery, she had found not only her purpose, but her true identity. Outside, the children's voices rose in song, their clear notes carrying across the evening air a melody that spoke of hope, determination, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. It was the sound of a new Africa being born, and Amara had played her part in making that birth possible. The spy who had been sent to destroy a dream had instead helped that dream take root and grow. And in the growing she had found her own salvation.